and welcome to the MAPS Canada webinar series. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I'm your host for the series. We're extremely excited to have you join us for our 11th episode of the webinar series. Since the beginning of June and continuing through to the end of August, we've had and will have an amazing selection of speakers, luminaries, scientists, doctors, and visionaries lined up just for you. We've gathered some of the best in the field, 3 additional speakers to be exact, to share some important information and their take on the psychedelic renaissance. We're in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance, with research projects and decriminalization proposals popping up across North America, and with MDMA on the verge of approval as a treatment for PTSD, psychedelic therapy is on track to become the next major breakthrough in mental health care. MAPS Canada, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has supported studies to develop psychedelics into safe and legal medical treatments since its formation in 2008. Currently, MAPS Canada is funding 2 separate studies on MDMA and cognitive processing therapy as a treatment for PTSD. Additionally, plans to fund studies that identify psychedelic treatments for eating disorders and others that involve Ibogaine are in the works. To conduct and publish scientific research and education supporting the beneficial use of psychedelic medicines, MAPS Canada relies on public donations and funding initiatives. The funds raised from this webinar series will go to fund that research. The webinar series is in its final push of our $250,000 fundraiser campaign, and we're currently $12,000 away from our goal. We hope to have our goal reached by the end of the series on August 25th. So if you'd like to help us reach our $250,000 goal, feel free to donate on the big button below. Every donation, large or small, counts. And for more information on MAPS Canada, please see our website at mapscanada.org. Just a few updates before we begin. The episode with Kaluti from last week will be rescheduled for August 19th. Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. There will be going an email reminder going out about this. And also, we would love to know how we are doing. There will be a testimonial form placed in the chat box and at the bottom of the screen for each submission today. By the end of the web series, we'll be doing a draw for 1 winner for 2 free tickets to our next webinar series. So if you feel you would like to fill that out when you have some time during a break, or even after the webinar series, you can definitely do that. But today we will be drawing by the end of the episode today for 2 free tickets for season 2 of Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance. So we'll have the form posted there as well. Make sure and have your forms in by 4:15 as we will be drawing by then. So we would like to start with a talk from our guest, Dr. Monnica Williams, who is joining us today. After that, we're going to open up to a Q&A session. So if you remember from the first few episodes, you can enter your questions in the box where it says ask a question, and we will be voting up questions and prioritizing those as well. So just want to say hi to some people joining us from all over the world here. We have Chicago. Make sure and let us know where you're from. We have Vancouver, Winnipeg, Calgary, Bowen Island. We have Montreal. We have New Brunswick. We have Cambridge, Ottawa, Calgary, Pemberton. We have Brazil, another from Ottawa. So Toronto, Hollywood, Red Deer, Alberta. So great to see so many people joining from all over the globe. Make sure and let us know where you're from. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Monnica Williams. Monnica Williams, PhD, is a board-certified licensed clinical psychologist specializing in cognitive behavioral therapies. She is an associate professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa, Canada Research Chair in Mental Health Disparities, and clinical director of the Behavioral Wellness Clinic in Tolland, Connecticut, where she offers psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies. Her research interests include the role of culture and race on mental illness, and she has over 100 academic publications. She is an authority on obsessive-compulsive disorder, including sexual orientation-themed OCD, racial trauma, and one of very few researchers focused on the inclusion of people of color in psychedelic medicine. Her work has been funded by local and federal competitive grants, including the National Institutes of Health on American Psychological Foundation. Her work with MAPS has sparked an international conversation on inclusion, access, and equity as psychedelics move into mainstream mental health care. She has named one of the top 25 leaders in PTSD. She has been featured in several media outlets, including NPR, PBS, CTV, Vice, The Washington Post, USA Today, CNN, and Huffington Post. She has written for the New York Times and State and maintains a blog on Psychology Today called Culturally Speaking. So her webinar topic today: psychedelics have been studied for the treatment of numerous mental health conditions as an avenue for personal growth and for enhancing well-being. However, psychedelic research studies have largely excluded people of color, leaving important questions unaddressed for these populations. Additionally, the war on drugs has created racial barriers to access and estrangement for many psychedelic communities. Even as decriminalization is expanding, Dr. Williams will discuss the impact of first-wave drug research abuses, social policies, and stereotypes on communities of color. She will discuss ethnic minority mental health and how psychedelic therapies may help or hinder healing for racialized individuals. Also discussed are the next steps ensuring that access to culturally informed care is prioritized as several psychedelics move into late phase trials and expanded access, including the importance of culturally informed approaches and training experiences of psychedelic therapists of color. So please help me welcome Dr. Monnica Williams.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic introduction. I wasn't even sure I recognized that person you were talking about.
It's so great to have you here, Monnica. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here. I'm so excited. I'm a little nervous too. You know, it's really nice to be doing something like right here in Canada in my new home. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will turn the screen over to you, and you can take it away, and then we'll come back for the Q&A session.
All right. Thank you so much. So let me see if I can make this technology work the way it's supposed to and get my presentation up here. All right. So hopefully you can all see that. And we'll take it away from there. So anyway, with that fantastic introduction, I don't think I need to say much more about myself other than that, you know, I am a board certified licensed clinical psychologist in the US and Canada. I clinically supervise diverse students. We see a lot of diverse clients, often with issues connected to race and racism. I wear a lot of hats, but I am primarily a researcher in my professional life anyway. Yeah, so one interest that I have is psychedelic research. You know, as a psychologist, I've been fascinated at how psychedelics can be a catalyst for progress and growth and healing and therapy. So I've been doing this work for the last several years. As you may know, there's been, you know, ongoing research in the clinical and therapeutic applications of psychedelics. And I do this because I believe this work really has the potential to improve the mental health of all people, all Canadians, especially those who've been underserved or have experienced difficulties due to racialization. And this slide here, this is a picture of what therapy looks like. This is from MAPS. For the MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, and two of the fantastic therapists there. So getting started, I'm going to tell you a little story about a guy named Luther who was traveling to college in Mississippi from his home in California. And while passing through Texas, he found himself approaching a police checkpoint in El Paso. So he made a U-turn as soon as he realized that a police checkpoint was not on his route, And so therefore he must have been going the wrong way. Police spotted him turning around and pulled him over. The officer asked to search his car. In the trunk, among many other things, the officer found an empty medicine vial, an empty glass vial in a backpack, and accused Luther of having drug paraphernalia. He said, "I could lock you up for 3 months for this." And he insisted the vial smelled like marijuana. In fact, he said that the smell of marijuana was wafting out of the trunk. They brought over their police dog to smell for any illegal substances. Nothing was found in the trunk, interestingly. But then the police told Luther that the dog picked up the scent of some substance on his car door. So the officer then asked Luther to return to his vehicle and follow them to the checkpoint for further inspection. Well, instead, Luther sped away in his car, finally abandoning the vehicle in a national park, and then he fled on foot. So police later recovered his vehicle. No drugs or weapons or any sort of contraband or stolen items were ever found in Luther's car. But a year later, he was apprehended in California and brought to Texas to face his outstanding charges. He was denied bail as he was considered a flight risk and was placed in a federal prison awaiting trial, charged with felony evasion from police. So given that Luther didn't have any drugs on him, why did he run, right? And I should just mention, this is not a picture of Luther. This is just from Thelma and Louise escaping police across the desert, but I thought it was a nice visual since I didn't actually have a picture of Luther. All right, so to understand Luther's behavior, we need to understand a little bit about racism. So in our society, white people believe, they tend to believe that racialized groups are doing well in life, that racism is no longer an issue and discrimination is declining, that they are not capable of racist behaviors. Whereas people in racialized groups have a different perspective because they are confronted with daily acts of racism that they experience or see, and so they have a very different reality. Part of the issue is that white people tend to limit their definition of racism to blatant, intentional, overt acts, but few people who commit racist acts actually will ever admit to intentionally wanting to harm others due to race. Even dyed-in-the-wool racist and Klans members, they'll just simply say, well, we don't have anything against those other folks. We're just defending our white heritage. So under this definition, very few acts of racism would be defined as such. So the reality is that even good people enact racism. And so acts of racism are often overlooked by those who don't experience it. Now, racism is real. And as far as we can tell by every economic and educational and social indicator and medical indicators, it's real, it's embedded, it's in individuals, it's in our social systems. Here's one example from my own community, the African-American community. We can see that a typical Black household has accumulated less than 1/10 of the wealth of a typical white one, and it's only getting worse. Over the past 25 years, the wealth gap between Blacks and whites in the US has nearly tripled, as well as the racial gap in who's graduating from college, with Blacks and Hispanics falling further behind white people in college graduation rates. That being said, some people have asked, do we have racism in Canada? Yes, racism happens in Canada too. Despite the fact that Quebec Premier François Legault said, I don't think there's a system of racism, adding that although racism exists, the majority of Quebecers are not racist. Well, despite that fact, Montreal's Public Consultation Office did an investigation and completed a 261-page report following a public consultation involving more than 7,000 people. And they made 38 recommendations. And it started with the recognition of the systematic nature of racism and discrimination against racialized groups and Indigenous people. And I should also add that I lived in Montreal for a year. I did my internship there at Montreal General Hospital, and there is plenty of racism in Quebec. So when doing psychedelic therapy with people of color, it should be no surprise that racial trauma material may emerge, or rather racial material that will emerge that we can call racial trauma. So what is racial trauma? And I'm going to answer that question for you. What is racial trauma? So racial trauma is just simply racism that is caused, it's simply trauma caused by racism. And it can be a combination of individual racism, community racism, historical racism, and systemic racism. And you might be wondering, well, what does that really look like? And here's an example of what that might look like. And first of all, I should also point out racial trauma is felt globally, particularly in the Western world. You may recognize this as a shot of when George Floyd was killed by police officers in the United States. And when police violence goes viral on social media, the mental health of whole communities of color suffers. And actually, there was a research study that came out in The Lancet showing just that, that there were more mental health days taken by people of color when things like this occur. And you can imagine how heartsick I felt to get this text message from my niece who lives in Germany when George Floyd was killed. And she's a, young, I guess they call them Afro-Deutscher in Germany. So young African-American German college student who couldn't stop crying when she saw what she saw on the media. And so this has a worldwide impact, right? So racial traumas are common. And when we think about trauma, we're often thinking about things like combat and rape and being held up at gunpoint. And yes, all those things can be traumatic, but there's also some traumas that are more unique or happen more frequently to people of color. And these include things like police harassment, search and assault, workplace discrimination, and we see so many people for these two things at my clinic, community violence, murder of loved ones, incarceration, and you better believe incarceration is traumatic, and distressing medical or even childbirth experiences. So people of color may be traumatized by these additional stressors. And there's also several types of stressors that people may experience who are immigrants or refugees. And I worked with refugees for some time when I lived in Kentucky, where I started a refugee mental health clinic at the University of Louisville, where we assessed refugees who are coming in for mental health concerns. And some of the common traumas we saw were experiencing and witnessing torture, people who fled because they were dealing with ethnic cleansing and persecution. You can also have racial traumas from the destruction of cultural practices or living in a war zone. The immigration process itself can be difficult on both ends, and many of the refugees we spoke to had traversed through, easily 10 countries to get to a place that they felt was safe. And then finally, deportation. You can imagine how traumatizing that can be, especially if you have kids seeing parents being torn away from parents. So all of these things can be traumatic, and even small instances of racism can cause psychological distress if they're experienced with enough frequency. And so these small acts of racism are called microaggressions. They are deniable acts of racism because people might say, oh, that's not obviously racially motivated. Maybe that person mistreated that other person for some other reason. One thing about microaggressions is even though they may seem small, they reinforce stereotypes and power differentials and create uncertainty and anxiety in people who experience them. So all told, all of that stuff can impact mental health. So, and research over the last 20 years has found profound connections between everything that has been studied, that every major mental illness, experiences of racism and discrimination can make those worse or even cause them in their own right. And when this happens, and then when this gets to a certain point, we might call it racial trauma, as I pointed out before. Now, police violence in particular can be traumatic. And to understand this, you know, it helps to understand the origins of the development of the police force. In a lot of places, the police, well, historical figures, historical events are prominent even into this day and age. One of the primary factors in the development of the police force was the institution of slavery and the desire to control indigenous people, which was accomplished in the form of slave patrols or night watches. So many Southern police departments began as slave patrols to wealthy landowners who would recover and punish slaves who tried to escape. And it's considered a forerunner to modern law enforcement. So within the Black American community, there's a strong cultural memory of abuses by police that extends from slave patrols to lynching to violence against peaceful civil rights protesters in the 60s and into modern times that haven't completely ended if you just watch the news. And in the Black and Indigenous communities in Canada, there's also a strong cultural memory of public abuses by law enforcement and the state that extends from residential schools to the 60s scoop, to the destruction of Africville, and to modern times as abuses and inequities are only becoming more clear, in the mainstream public. And to the point, even now, today, when we have Black Lives Matter activists in Canada calling for a defunding of the police, right? So we know there's something happening there, and it seems pretty serious that we should pay attention. So a lot of this goes back to more recently the war on drugs. Now, many currently illegal drugs, such as psychedelics and opiates, were used for thousands of years for both medicinal and spiritual purposes. But why some drugs are legal and other drugs are illegal is not based on any science surrounding the risks of these drugs, but it's rather who's associated with the drugs. So it really has nothing to do with the harms. It's really more to do with moralism and racism toward Black, Asian, and Indigenous people. And this is really clear in criminal justice disparities and the way that drugs are objectively, and the way that certain drugs are objectively less harmful than others, such as MDMA and cannabis, but they're highly criminalized across the world. Although, of course, I know cannabis is now legal here in Canada. But other drugs that are proven to be much more harmful, such as alcohol or benzodiazepines, are not considered dangerous, even though they are. So the development of these punitive drug policies has largely been fueled by fears of racial integration or Indigenous sovereignty, or the idea that people of color might marry or have children with white women. So that's behind a lot of the hysteria that caused many drugs to be made illegal. So after the war on drugs was announced by Ronald Reagan in the United States in the 1980s, Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was quick to follow suit. And so all of these efforts are also, they're not applied equally. So policing efforts are heavily biased in favor of ethnic minority neighborhoods and people of color, which has resulted in incarceration and trauma primarily in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. So for example, Indigenous Canadians account for a quarter of the federal prison population, but only 4% of the general population. So this is like 500% overrepresentation. And Black Canadians are the fastest growing group in federal prisons, accounting for 10% of the federal prison population, but only are 3% of the general population, which is a 300% overrepresentation. So in 2017, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination investigated issues within Canada and found a number of concerns. And they made several recommendations, but they said that it's clear that Canada has deeply rooted issues with racial discrimination, and this is reflected in their drug policies. So how does all this work, right? So basically, people of color are targeted and stigmatized. White people have safe places to explore the use of psychedelics, whereas most people of color don't. And I saw this firsthand for myself when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. This is a picture from University of Pennsylvania, which is located in West Philly, which is primarily a Black neighborhood. And three days a week at night, it was very common to see drunken and high undergrads stumbling along the streets in West Philly at all hours. And the cops were out too. And at first I thought, oh, the cops are out to arrest all these drunken, rabble-rousers. But no, they're not out there to do that. They're actually protecting the kids, which I think is good in principle for cops to protect people. That's what they should be doing. But they don't hesitate to arrest or harass people of color in that community, or even students of color. So it's really clear there's a double standard when it comes to who's allowed to do harmless, youthful experimentation and who's criminalized, right? So all that said, I'm going to get back to my story about Luther. And I want to give you a little background about Luther's life to help you understand why he ran from police. So Luther graduated from high school and began college in Jackson, Mississippi, where he studied business marketing and management. He worked in financial services at the School for Income, and then in January he was charged with grand theft and attempted robbery because a friend of his, not him, but a friend of his, was accused of taking $20 from another young person at the mall. And the police tried to get Luther to rat him out. Luther wasn't even there, but he was informed of the incident by the friend, and he didn't want to, say anything about his friend to the cops. So he was considered an accessory, and as a result, he was convicted of grand theft and sentenced to 60 days in jail and 3 years on probation. Now, there were also robbery and attempted robbery charges against him, but those were dismissed, and he just got the grand theft. So you can imagine the impact of that conviction, on a young person trying to go to college. But he, did his best to stick it out. He continued his college career without further incident until March, 2 years later, when he was charged with possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. Now, an envelope containing marijuana was addressed to him and mailed to his dormitory. However, Luther did not know about this envelope and never received it, as it was intercepted by the authorities before arriving to the dorm. He was surprised and perplexed by the situation, as he didn't use drugs, but he couldn't afford an attorney, so he agreed to a plea bargain, and already with something on his record, it didn't look good for him. So he agreed to a plea bargain that would allow him to stay in school and out of jail, but left him with a felony conviction and 4 years of additional probation. The next year, he had another difficult experience. He went to Florida on spring break, as many of you do, with some college friends. And there he was involved in a traffic accident in Miami, where he was thrown off his scooter when an intoxicated pedestrian walked into an intersection. Now, Luther was laying on the street and dragged onto the sidewalk by bystanders, and thus he was not immediately seen by arriving police, and as the police didn't see him, they charged him with leaving the scene. So this has all happened to Luther. He's not had good experiences with law enforcement, and it is now 4 years later that he's driving to Mississippi from California, and while passing through Texas, finds himself approaching that checkpoint in El Paso. So his many past problems led him to avoidance of police. However, this backfired when he tried to avoid the checkpoint and made the U-turn, because that actually caused him to be stopped and searched. And when the encounter intensified, Luther fled in terror, feeling unsafe. Luther had grown up in a rough, segregated community in California that was full of gang and police violence. He experienced several traumatic events during his own life. One of the most memorable was witnessing a teenage girl that he had known all of his life get shot down and die in front of him at a community center due to senseless community violence. He saw her bleed out as they waited for an ambulance to arrive. The ambulance took an hour to arrive. And at that time, when he saw that, he thought, wow, anything could happen to anyone at any time. She was an honor student, someone everyone had considered an angel, and he thought, gosh, if that can happen to her, what hope is there for me? And he also felt traumatized another time when he learned that one of his best friends was murdered right after he'd been drafted by the NFL, and when he lost another one of his best friends to a tainted drug. Luther also shared a number of racist experiences over the course of his lifetime, including being called racial slurs by school teachers, seeing African-American young men shot by police on the news, and having his car searched repeatedly by police. He generally coped with these experiences by trying to avoid negative thoughts and feelings about the events. And he also tried to prevent future experiences from happening by avoiding. He avoided places where there were predominantly white people, and he avoided places where there were police. He told me he was afraid of police and started seeing himself and others in a more negative way, feeling the world was a dangerous place, feeling a loss of interest in activities he once enjoyed, feeling detached and alienated from others. He had all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's important to remember to consider the sum of the impact of these experiences on how Luther reacted when he encountered those police that fateful day in Texas. That situation involved guns, the cause of his childhood friend's death. It involved discussion of drugs, the cause of his close friend's death. It involved law enforcement, which was connected to so many negative experiences in his life, and false accusations of wrongdoing, which triggered fears of being racially profiled, threats by the border officer, which made him concerned about his life and liberty, and being in a remote desert area, which made him think more about unjustified police killings of Black men. But Luther didn't have time to process all this. This was an instant triggered fear response of panic that he was unable to control, leading to his flight. So lots of Black and Indigenous men are heavily subject to profiling by law enforcement, and Luther's story is just one of hundreds or thousands. Honestly, I don't know any Black men who haven't had some encounters, some negative encounters with law enforcement in some way, and many have spent time behind bars for some BS reason or another. So as a result, people of color may be dealing with stressful legal issues in addition to the traumatization that they already have. And drugs are frequently an excuse for humiliating and traumatizing searches and incarceration. And I have one example from Baltimore where a man was pulled over for really a traffic stop, and he was searched without his vehicle was searched without consent. And when the police couldn't find anything, they strip searched him, including pulling down his pants and underwear and exposing his genitals on the side of the road while they strip searched him. And they found some marijuana, which they seized, and cash. And they told the man that he'd get his cash back, but he didn't. The police kept the cash, and the man filed a complaint against the officer, but nothing happened to him. So this is the situation that we're dealing with, where people of color are literally helpless against whatever indignities, theft, violence are done to them by law enforcement in the name of looking for drugs. So there's a lot of mistrust, and there's even medical mistrust as well. We know that people of color often underutilize healthcare services out of fears of being mistreated. They may worry about being hospitalized involuntarily or being used as guinea pigs. Black people appear to have a greater mistrust of the medical establishment and mental health care believing that medical institutions hold racist attitudes. And a lot of these negative perceptions go all the way back to slavery days, and one very sort of emblematic example of research abuse is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was government sanctioned. It was actually paid for and sponsored by the U.S. government. And consider that over 100 people died from that disease, and the people in the study didn't even know they were in the study. And so obviously that's made Black people really wary. And if that was the only research abuse in history, that would be fantastic. But there are many more. There are even some abusive research projects going on even now into current times, but I'm not going to talk about all of them because that'd be a whole day lecture. I'm just going to talk about one, which was called MK Ultra, that was launched in 1952 to study mind control techniques, and it was funded by the CIA in the US. And as part of that study, hundreds of people were given LSD, many without their knowledge or consent. And the subjects in that study included Americans, Canadians, and internationals. And there were several facilities that were receiving these funds that thought they were just getting, that thought they were getting government grants, and they didn't realize the CIA was behind it, although some of them did know. And there were studies there were MK Ultra studies that were happening in Canada too. And I'm going to give you one example of a study that was done at the University of Kentucky, where psychedelics were administered over long periods of time to inmates at an institutional research facility. And so one study that were done, there were hundreds of studies done there, but one study included Negro male drug addicts, and comparison subjects were all healthy, affluent, non-incarcerated white volunteers who received LSD at the PI's private home. So knowing what we know about set and setting, you can imagine that these two groups of people had very different experiences. At Cold Spring Harbor, the experiments with the white volunteers were conducted in the home, again, of the PI, under social conditions designed to reduce anxiety. Whereas the situation in the research facility was coercive at best. And one of those participants was interviewed later. His name was Edward Flowers, and he participated in experiments at the Addiction Research Center, which is what it was called, ARC for short, or also they called it the Narco Farm. He said, they used my ass and took advantage of me, being a young kid and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Back then, at that time, for a while there, I was angry and bitter. And then in the 70s, when it became illegal or very difficult to do research with prisoners, the narco farm closed and moved to the East Coast and became NIDA. Okay, so it should be no surprise then, given the memory of research abuses, the stigma around drugs, and the injustices done to communities of color, that there aren't a lot of people of color who are interested in being part of psychedelic research. And we studied this in my lab and published a paper in 2018. We looked at all the RCTs, all the randomized controlled trials that have been done for psychedelic assisted therapy worldwide. And we found that to date, it was almost all white people have been part of the studies, with over 82% being non-Hispanic white, 2.5% were Black, 2% were Latino or Latinx, less than 2% were of Asian origin, less than 5% were Indigenous origin. And so this led one media outlet to conclude that Black Americans are being left out of psychedelic research. I wish they had just said people of color are being left out, because that's true too. But given all the the emphasis on how badly Black people have been treated, maybe it's not a bad idea that we focus on that as well. So all this to say that that Black people are feel very invisible, and Black women are among the most invisible, I think. We call it Invisibility Syndrome. It's when people don't see you for who you are, they only see your outward features. And issues like this might emerge during psychedelic assisted therapy. Now, imagine you're the therapist or the guide or facilitator or healer, and you're doing psychedelic therapy with somebody, and this comes up. And I know there's times you do psychedelic therapy where you don't say anything, you just let the process unfold. And there's other times where you might say something or intervene. And imagine this is one of those times where you should say something or intervene. What do you say? Most trainees, therapists that I've encountered have no idea what to say here. No idea, right? And keep in mind that although, psychedelics are safe compared to so many things, they're also very powerful. And people can be hurt, and they can be harmed, and they can experience trauma and damage. If they're receiving psychedelic therapy from somebody that doesn't know how to competently manage the issues that come up for them. So all that to say, the question I have is, can psychedelics heal racial trauma? And as I pointed out, there's a lot of trauma all around the world and on both sides of the US-Canadian border. I did do a study. I've been studying this issue with my collaborator, one of my many collaborators, Dr. Alan Davis at Ohio State, who was also part of the team at Johns Hopkins. And we collected data. We collected survey data from 468 people in Canada and the US. And we asked them about their past experiences of racial trauma and mental health symptoms. We only included people of color who said that they had used psychedelics and that had helped them to manage racial and ethnic discrimination. Because we're really trying to find out, can psychedelics help racial trauma? And then, and for who is it most helpful? And so we looked at changes that we assessed by a retrospective report of the 30 days before a specific memorable psychedelic experience, before and after. And it was really exciting because we found that that a lot of people did have benefit, significant benefit. This is an analysis we did. It's called the Canonical correlation analysis. If it confuses you, don't worry about it. It's just for the nerds out there. But what we saw was that the intensity of the acute psychedelic effect was strongly correlated to changes in mental health symptoms. And the greater the intensity of the mystical type experience, the greater the intensity of the insight, that contributed to the intensity of these acute psychedelic effects. And there was also a kind of a negative relationship, a lower intensity of challenging experiences. And then in terms of the changes in mental health symptoms, we saw that these changes were correlated to greater reductions in racial trauma symptoms, reduction in stress symptoms, depression, and anxiety. And this was like a huge effect size. That's what that D is. It was highly significant. So we've written this up into a paper. It's under review now. But in any case, this was very exciting to see that so many people could be helped for their racial trauma with psychedelics in a naturalistic setting. And this led me to write this article, Why Black People Should Embrace Psychedelic Healing, Reclaiming Our Cultural Birthright. And again, given that almost all white people have been part of psychedelic research studies, at least research studies that were done in an ethical way as patients and researchers, if white people are benefiting from psychedelics, I think people of color should too. There's been a lot of work focused on this goal, and we have to make it a priority to implement racial equity and access. I mean, keep in mind that many psychedelic traditions originated from Indigenous healing practice. And there's been much written about the use of the indigenous use of plant medicines from Mexico and South America. But psychedelics have been used across cultures and eras, in ancient times, in biblical times, and for thousands of years in African culture and tradition. So, so we're all entitled to these substances. They grow everywhere. And I won't go into detail because you can read this article and it will tell you all about the cool psychedelic traditions in Africa. But they're there and we deserve them. And I also, along that vein, I wrote an article with two of my dear colleagues. It's basically 3 Black women therapists describe their MDMA experiences. And this article is coming out soon. And it's the first account in the academic literature that I could find that we know of that's focused on the psychedelic experiences of Black women. And there's so many cultural themes that came up for all 3 of the Black women who talk about their stories, that you can see that this is a really important piece of it. And also themes of racism and discrimination and pain and racial trauma came up too. So there's a tension here. There's a desire to bring psychedelics to the public, but there's also cultural concerns. A lot of people of color are wary, and there's concerns about inclusion, right? So as this goes forward, are we going to do it right? Are we going to include everybody? And then trying to figure out the best way to do this work so that it's beneficial and safe for everyone. Because whether we like it or not, and I'm imagining most of you are here because you like it, psychedelic assisted therapies have arrived, right? They're here, they're happening. You can go to, you can not only just be part of a study, but you can get psychedelics in church now. You can, and now just this past week, some 4 terminally ill Canadians got a special exemption to use psychedelic therapy to sort of, ease their angst around death, right? It was described as the right to try, because if you have the right to die, why shouldn't you have the right to try, psilocybin mushrooms, right? So one question that I have, I train and educate therapists. I clinically supervise therapists. I teach them how to do different therapies. And I'm interested in making sure that mental health professionals are equipped to do this important work. How do we ensure safety of the most vulnerable groups who need this the most? And we have this really cool, important new field of study emerging. So there's already a thriving program at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco for training psychedelic therapists, but we need our own programs here in Canada too. And so I've been working with colleagues here to make that happen. So the vision is a training program for learners in psychedelic research, clinical therapies, and spiritual applications, which will include some didactics around theoretical, historical, anthropological, and spiritual dimensions of psychedelics across culture and throughout history. Study on a current research in psychedelic medicine, psychopharmacology, traditional healing practices, drug policy, so that people who want to do more work in psychedelic research or therapy or the spiritual use of psychedelics can be well equipped to do that. So we were really excited to launch the first phase of the program this summer. Myself and Dr. Ann Vallely, who's in religious studies and anthropology. We just launched our first course, a hybrid graduate undergraduate course called Psychedelic Survey of an Emerging Field. And it was a little bit of a whirlwind getting that going this summer, but the class filled very quickly. And we have a couple more classes slated for the fall, and for the winter, we have a fantastic class in psychedelics, politics, and harm reduction in the fall, and in the spring, sacred plant medicines and spirituality. And all you need are those 3 classes to get this, what's kind of like a micro certificate in psychedelic studies. But we are working on the big guns here. We're working on a certificate program. And I'm so excited to share this with you because we talked to our deans and they were all excited about it. And I said, we want to do the certificate program. And they said, well, how about a master's? And we're like, yeah, how about a master's? So here's what that might look like. And the program we're building, it's going to be psychedelic and consciousness studies. We've got the applications in, they're under review, and there's sort of a long process to get everything approved. But hoping to be maybe the first program like this ever, which is so exciting. So on that note, I'm gonna end here. If you want to learn more about psychedelics and racial trauma, here's some reading you can do. These are articles I've written about psychedelics and racial trauma. And then also, if you are a clinician or a therapist, or you just want to learn how to help people better, people have been asking me for resources on how to do that. So I'm going to put in a shameless plug for my books. This one's Eliminating Race-Based Mental Health Disparities. And that came out last year. And this one just came out last month, Managing Microaggressions, because the last thing you want to do when you're working with a client or a patient is do microaggressions, especially while they're on a psychedelic journey, because that could make for a bad journey. So learn about microaggressions, don't do them. And then even better, help people cope with them. So that's all I have today. I want to thank you all for being here. I'm happy to answer questions. And if you want to follow my psychedelic work, I have a webpage on my website. It's down here at the bottom. Follow my psychedelic work here, monicawilliams.com/psychedelics.php, and all the psychedelic talks and things and stuff that I do, and the research we're doing, and everything is there. So you can follow that. And that's all for now. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Monica. That was we're so grateful to have you here, and it's an honor to have you on the webinar today. And thank you for speaking on such important and sensitive topics, and topics that need to be talked about and be brought, to the forefront and have attention brought to. So we really appreciate that. Thank you for that. So. Sorry, just a couple of squirrels running around my feet here. Next, we're going to go into a question and answer session. So we have a whole bunch of questions at the bottom. So I'll go through and moderate them, and then we'll get you to answer a few. So how we're going to work it is the ones that have the most votes will go to first, and then I have a few that have come in from our social media as well. So we'll look at those. So are you ready to go into the question and answer?
Oh yeah, you bet.
Perfect. So the first one that we have today comes from Antonio. Are there any studies looking at whether psychedelics can treat transgenerational racial trauma, either cultural or biological epigenetic? So I can read that again. Are there any studies looking at whether psychedelics can treat transgenerational racial trauma, either cultural or biological epigenetic?
No. There aren't any studies looking at how to treat that, psychedelic or otherwise. Unfortunately, issues about, racial and ethnic trauma haven't really gotten a lot of attention, and there hasn't really been funding to do that. But I am hoping now with, of course, the horrible events around George Floyd, but there is increased attention around these things. And so I'm hoping we're going to see more research like that looks at the toll that it takes on people generation after generation who have historical and cultural trauma. But there's nothing yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. The second question is, do you have any thoughts on how to address the problem of racial representation in a lot of mental health research, in brackets, especially clinical trials? Most research involves white participants, so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how to make this more diverse while also addressing selection bias, cultural beliefs, and seeking help for mental health issues.
Yeah, really good question. So when I was at the University of Connecticut, we were part of the MAPS clinical trials, and our goal was to have a site that was focused on the experience of people of color, ethnic minority clients. And so we tailored our site specifically to bring in people of color and to make sure that they had a really good culturally informed experience. And I wrote a paper about it. It's basically a step-by-step guide to how to diversify your psychedelic study. So it's out there. Journal of Psychedelic Studies published it in February. But also, there's a lot of things we knew how to do. We were a super diverse team, intentionally diverse, and we knew how to reach our own folks. And so I think if you just diversify your research team, that'll go a long way toward diversifying the research that you do. But if you don't have a diverse research thing, there's this other thing called community-based participatory research. There's already like some nice literature around how to do it, where you partner with individuals and groups in the community and you work together on a research project that will, have some outcome at some point that will eventually benefit the community. But that's a great way to learn about the communities that you want to serve if you're not a part of those communities. Like, I highly recommend that. And again, there's already like a vast body of research on exactly how to do that. We did a campaign like that in Louisville, Kentucky. It was an outreach for African Americans with depression. And we actually brought in community leaders to be part of our team, and just regular people and people with depression. And we reached out to the clinics and in the area and did the campaign. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So the next one we're going to go on to is from Jordan, and it's in regards to psychotherapy techniques. He asks, are there any psychotherapy techniques that are specific to patients that hold extreme prejudice? Are there psychedelics that could potentiate this kind of treatment? If so, what are the psychedelics and why are they effective?
Yeah, so the first part of that question is there aren't any therapeutic techniques that have been developed specifically to help people who are very prejudiced, unfortunately. That being said, people who do have prejudice, like, they can be helped. It's a long, slow process. In the book that I wrote, Managing Microaggression, I have a couple of vignettes for people to illustrate how some of these things could be done in therapy. And there is a vignette where there's a student who's a racist student who's got a therapist of color, and it sort of illustrates how the therapist can sort of start to slowly help change her way of thinking. So I'm a behaviorist, so it's a cognitive behavioral approach. But yeah. So what was the second half of that question?
The second half is, are there psychedelics that could potentiate this kind of treatment? If so, what are the psychedelics and why are they effective?
Yeah. So I again, this is an empirical question, hasn't been studied, but I would like to study it, and I think it's worth doing. And I do think that psychedelics can help reduce racism and make people less racist and more egalitarian, but I don't think it happens automatically. Because if it did, then the psychedelic community would be integrated, right? And we're not. So, so I think it does take some work. I think, you have to set your intention to becoming less racist, and you have to learn about racism so you understand what you're trying to overcome. So, so I have this fantasy maybe of doing an anti-racism workshop with psychedelics to help people move forward. I do anti-racism training and workshops already without the psychedelics, but I'd like to try it with to see if that moves things along faster.
Absolutely. That would be an amazing idea. So the next question goes back to therapy protocols. Psychedelic therapy protocols have been developed mostly by cisgender white males to treat white patients. Are there any research groups looking at developing alternative protocols to include more diverse perspectives and cultural approaches? For example, using culturally relevant music or different language/terminology.
Yes, this is super important. And we did do a lot of this at the University of Connecticut when we did our study there. We intentionally thought about how are we going to do the music in a way that's going to resonate for these folks, because all of us had MDMA in a training setting, and we all were like, well, I don't know if I'd have picked that music. And then they're like, yeah, I didn't really care for that music either. Like, I don't want to listen to new age space music. So we were like, well, we have to think about so this sort of told us that maybe we need to think about our participants and what they might like. And so we really tried to tailor the playlist to their cultural needs, as well as other things like the age cohort and so forth. And we really put a lot of thought into the setting, how to make it feel, more culturally welcoming and, less, white. And I think we succeeded. We had everybody in the group help pick decorations that kind of spoke to them from their culture. So it was all kind of an authentic effort. It wasn't just it wasn't like a false appropriation, because everything that we used was meaningful to us. So yeah, it's important.
Absolutely. I definitely get that. And it helps in a way to make it less clinical and, more comfortable as well. We're still on the topic of protocol for our next question, and it's from Dave, and he asks, I'm interested to know your protocol and how you structure your psychedelic therapy sessions, and how you incorporate CBT. Also, what compounds are your clients working with? Have you explored 2CB as a therapeutic?
So right now we're not doing the MAPS clinical trials because bad things happen at the University of Connecticut that I don't want to get into because it's traumatic. But we are doing ketamine therapy right now at my clinic in Connecticut. And the protocol that we use, it's, we have a preparatory session, and then we have a half-day session with the ketamine and 2 therapists. And then we have integration session the next day. And I would say about half of the people that we're seeing is for racial trauma. So the protocols that we've developed are specifically for people of color who've experienced racial trauma. I mean, in addition to people who maybe haven't, we might just use more of a standard protocol for. We do use CBT somewhat, but a lot of it is also, kind of giving space for the medicine to do its thing and kind of providing that safe container for people. But we also use, we do some internal family systems, and we do functional analytic psychotherapy, which is a behavioral relational kind of therapy, where the therapist is more open themselves and has more of a connection directly to the client, which I think is really important for people of color who felt very distanced by medical providers, to have somebody say, okay, no, if you're in the dark right now, I'm going to come down and sit with you in the dark as this passes, So that's the approach that, our therapists are trained to take. And so far it's been pretty good.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Next question comes from Brad. What does anti-racist policy look like in a psychedelic therapy when the systems used to validate the efficacy of safety of these therapies are built with racist policy?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is kind of developing some of our own tools and our own techniques. So of course, all of this is under, the umbrella of white supremacy in the Western culture. So there's not much we could do about all of that. But, I have developed my own measures for racial trauma, which have been published and validated, including an interview, a clinical interview. And so I'm measuring things that are important to me, that I think then that I know are important to the people we're seeing. And then we're adapting the protocols to what we feel are the important needs of the people we're seeing. And so we're doing that work ourselves. And I think, I think it would be hard or impossible for, for people in one culture to develop something that's going to be optimal for someone in another culture. So I think this is why we need diverse researchers, so that when we are developing these treatments, we can be thinking about the needs of everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the next question is from Stephanie. Given the incredible trauma taking place in the US with the government's response to the pandemic, what role do you see psychedelics playing in the post-COVID world? How could they be used to address not only the pandemic trauma, but also in regards to racial trauma?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Before this all started, I was applying for some research funds, just for psychedelics for racial trauma, And one of the funding agencies I was working with, they said that seemed very eager to actually fund this study for us, kind of backed off and said, with COVID going on, we don't really think that psychedelics is a priority. And I was like, what, are you kidding me? With all the grief and anxiety and depression and loss people have, we need psychedelics more than ever. So in short, I think there's a huge role for psychedelics because, if you look at the death rate right now in the United States, it's about 1,000 people a day, up to last I checked, 160,000 deaths. Fortunately, things are slowing down here in Canada, but there's still been lots of deaths, and all over the world, so many people have lost their life or they're very, very ill. And everybody around the world is isolated. So considering all of this, there's going to be a lot of healing that's going to be needed. I mean, there's healing that's needed now, really, but it's going to be maybe more obvious when we're out of survival mode and people are kind of licking their wounds and they're like, oh man, what happened? And I think psychedelics can be a huge force for healing when that happens. And so I hope that funders will recognize the importance of that and, kind of open up their wallets to make that research happen, because right now, the federal government just isn't paying for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, let's go to another question here. With the non-scientific classification of drugs you mentioned, what needs to happen to clarify the benefits of psychedelics and distinguish from other drugs? There's a second part to the question here. With potential legalization of MDMA for treatment of PTSD, what is the path to mainstream the knowledge of the benefits of other psychedelics while updating the dangers of other legal drugs? In other words, alcohol, etc.
Yeah, well, I think we have to get the word out. I mean, I have a blog, like you said, I've published 100 articles. So I'm doing my part, but I think everybody needs to do what they can to get the word out, to help disseminate accurate information, to blog about it, to write about it, to if you see people writing ridiculous things online, to smack them down, So I think we all just need to do what we can to help educate each other and the public, so that, because I think that that's really going to be one of the big things that causes, all of this to shift is just educating people about the harms. And of course, I'm going to keep doing my research. So, and my colleagues who are doing this work, they're continuing to toil away to get the results out there as fast as we can. But until very recently, and even still now, the work was done under very hostile conditions. The work was illegal until, not that long ago. And then even then, you could lose your reputation, your academic appointment just for talking about it. So, I consider myself rather fortunate coming to the party a little late here, because some of my colleagues, endured great ridicule and much more persecution than I have. I had my study shut down early at UConn, which was a huge professional trauma in its own right. But things have been so much worse for so many others. So, so the work has been hard. So we're only now getting the data that we need to make the case for the benefits and the safety. But the research, it is booming, it's blossoming. So the findings are going to keep coming out faster and faster, and we'll have all the knowledge we need, but we don't have everything we need. And we can't even rely, I don't think, on the first wave studies, just because a lot of them were done in an unscientific or unethical way. So I think we need to do our own new studies.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, it's great to see that there are many changes happening, and that, it's getting a little bit easier to work with psychedelics and in educational facilities and whatnot. And it's so great to see the course that you're developing as well. I know many people are going to be interested in those as well.
Yeah,
so
we should sign up fast.
You continued doing that great work, and we'll continue sharing it and, and hosting you and getting that word out for you as well. So just working together to share that word. So we have a few questions left here and about 12 minutes left on our time. The next one is, what are some ways psychotherapists can start the conversation in their local communities related to breaking barriers to access of psychedelic healing in communities of color?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it works better if therapists of color are going into their own communities, because there's so much mistrust now that's built up for good reasons that it would be really hard to establish trust in communities of color unless you already had an inroad, unless you were already, connected in some way. So I think the best thing would be for therapists of color to start to reach out to people in their own communities. And I know that there are several communities of color. There are several thriving psychedelic communities of color. I mean, not as many as I think, one would hope, but there are some, and they're kind of forging their own path and making their own traditions. And I think that's what needs to happen. That being said, people who are in these communities, I think they can and should reach out to people of color too. The problem, it's not quite that simple. The problem is that most people lead very segregated lives. So you can't invite your friends of color to come to your integration circle if you don't have any friends of color. So I think that we all need to do our own personal anti-racism work and ask ourselves why we don't have more friends of color, and then kind of do what we need to do to change that. So I think that's kind of part of the issue too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Next one is from Brenda. Do you think restorative justice dialogues focused on race-based harms could be enhanced with psychedelics?
It's a good question. I have not thought of that. I think we need to have the dialogues. Can they be? I think they can be improved with psychedelics. I haven't thought about exactly how that would look. I have tried that at a personal level. It didn't work. So, but I'm sure that there's a way to do it. I think it might take some, a couple smart people get together and think about it and try a few things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We had another question pop up here from Amy, and it's, what is the top advice you would give psychedelic practitioners or researchers who want to bring a more anti-racist approach to their work?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is to become, is to do your own personal work to become anti-racist. So that means sort of asking yourself really hard questions about how you contribute to racism on an individual and systemic level. And then I think once you start to do that work, you're going to find out that, this is a lot harder than I thought. and I think that'll help sort of give insight into some of the struggles that people of color have, that I think you're going to be much better placed to empathize and assist when you kind of run up against some of that stuff yourself. So I'd say, like, learn how to be an ally, which is like easier said than done. I'm like actually writing a couple of papers about allyship now, and we have one paper that we're working on called White Allies, Easy to Say, Hard to Do. I'm thinking maybe I should just call it like Leprechauns, Unicorns, and White Allies, because they're just so hard to find. But we need more of you white people to be allies. So please, and to do that, you have to do your own anti-racism work, because we're all affected by racism, because it's the water, it's like the air you breathe, it's the water you drink. And unless you are consciously working against it, it's infecting you, right? So yeah. And the books I mentioned are a great resource. That's why I wrote them.
Perfect. And we can get, if we can get a link to those so we can share them, maybe our tech team can get on that so we can share them in the chat there for you. The next question here is, in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, how should we as practitioners acknowledge and honor the indigenous roots of many psychedelic substances, for example, ayahuasca, so that we are avoiding culturally appropriating these healing practices? And this has actually been a very popular question that's come across a few webinars as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I don't know that I necessarily feel qualified to answer that question. I'm not like an ayahuasca practitioner, and I'm not an Indigenous person. I've had ayahuasca, but that I don't know that that makes me qualified to weigh in on this. So I do think appropriation is a big problem, and I do think we need to think more about the origins of the psychedelics we use and the techniques that we use. Like a lot of the techniques that are used for psychedelic therapy, people got from Indigenous people. So we have this bizarre history of psychedelics that starts with white men and ends with white men. And there have been people of color involved since the beginning of time. So I think we have to rewrite our narratives to include all the people that have been left out. Because if we just keep sticking to this, again, this white pantheon, we're going to continue to appropriate. So I think the first step is acknowledgement, respect, appreciation of the many people of color who have contributed to this knowledge and brought it to where it is now. And then also active involvement and making sure that, if you have important decisions in organizations, that you are purposely making seats at the table for Indigenous practitioners, so that everyone's part of the conversation, like all the stakeholders are represented.
Absolutely. Thank you. We did have one other question come in from our social media here, and it says, are pure intentions enough to avoid tokenism when trying to improve the diversity within an organization?
No, you have to also not just have good intentions, you have to also have education, because you can't, if you can't see the problem, you can't fix it, even if you have good intentions. And if you don't have the tools, you can't fix it even if you have good intentions. So, so I'm moving right now, and so this is very much on my mind. If you want to mount a big screen TV on the wall, you can't do that with a butter knife, right? So you can have all the great intentions in the world, but if you don't have the tools and you don't know how to do it, it's not going to happen, or it's going to be a disaster, or something's going to break. So you got to get the education and knowledge that you need, in addition to having good intentions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We do have one more question, if I can sneak it in. What can we do with our social media to create a safe space for Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer people to engage and share specific needs that possibly aren't addressed?
Yeah, I love that question, because so much of social media is traumatizing to people like me because of all of the racist and bigoted things that people say and get away with. So, so I think we have to demand responsible social media, and it's just not okay to be saying racist things. I get a racist email from my Psychology Today blog every other day. I have to go and erase these racist messages, and every time I see one come into my email box, my heart starts pounding. It's oh crap, that's a racist thing, And this is somebody I don't even know, but it still affects you, and it accumulates, and I feel very alone sometimes, and it would be nice if other people could help shoulder the load. Like I've said to Psychology Today, hey, can you screen these out? And they're like, oh no, just turn off your comments. Well, I don't want to turn off the comments. I want people to be able to comment. So, and you can probably think of analogous situations where it would be nice if everybody was helping to make social media safe for everyone else. And so if you see a racist comment, you can flag it. And then the racists, they're very crafty. They don't use racist slurs. They kind of put it in a sneaky way so it gets past the low tech filters. But you can flag it, you can respond to it, you can point it out, you can say, hey, this is really racist. I find this offensive. It's nice to have everybody doing that, not just the people of color, because then everyone's like, oh, see how angry they are? Well, we wouldn't be angry if everyone would help. So yeah, I think we all need to take more responsibility for making social media safer for people with marginalized identities.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And yeah, it's definitely something that we can all come together to work on in the future. So we're coming near to the end of the webinar, and I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for being here with us. We are completely honored to have you on the webinar, and we would definitely love to have you back again someday. And thank you for sharing everything you have today with us. Such important, sensitive, but such important topics. So are there any final words that you would like to leave us with today?
Well, I'm excited and honored to be here. I wish I could see you all. It's so hard doing like a talk into like a void, but it is what it is. That's the COVID world we live in. And I hope that someday I could have a chance to do a talk like this and have all of you in the audience and see you and like hear your voices and stuff, and hear your comments and have real time in-person discussions. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Monica, and we'll hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you. So in closing here, I would first of all like to thank our speaker, Dr. Monica Williams, for being our guest today. Thank you to the MAPS Canada volunteers who are assisting with this event. Thank you to all of our speakers, past, present, and future. We still have 3 remaining, and we appreciate all of the work that you are doing. Of course, thank you to our amazing sponsors, and most importantly, thank you to all of you. So before we sign off here, I'm going to ask Michael if he's ready to join us. Michael is the volunteer coordinator and assistant to the executive. There he is.
Hello, everyone.
He does a lot of work behind the scenes, so now you get to see his wonderful face here today. So Michael is going to do the draw for the 2 free tickets to season 2 of the webinar series, which we officially haven't launched yet, but you guys are kind of getting a sneak peek. So he's going to do that live for you right now, and let's find out who the winner is, Michael.
All right, here we go, everyone. Webinar Boyd. All right, and so the winner for today for those 2 tickets is going to be, this might be flipped backwards, Tamara.
Tamara.
Okay. Hope I'm pronouncing your last name right. Congratulations.
Tamara. So you have 2 free tickets to season 2, the whole season of Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance, which we are going to be launching near the end of this. So thank you so much, Michael. It's great to see your face on screen here.
Thanks for having me on.
And just to let you guys know, we're going to be doing another contest. It is going to run from now until the next webinar with Bia next week on Tuesday. So you'll have a chance to fill out that form. And for everyone who fills out that form, you'll have a chance as well to win 2 free tickets for season 2 of the webinar. So just in closing, our next episode is August 18th with Bia, and she will be followed by Kaluti on August 19th. So it's going to be 2 webinar episodes next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, both at 3 p.m. And our last episode will be the week after with Wade Davis on August 25th. So make sure and submit your questions in advance. And our full lineup can be viewed on the webpage at mapscanada.org/webinar. And just a reminder that we're only $12,000 away from hitting our goal of $250,000 for our fundraiser campaign. So if you'd like to help on the final leg with this, you can click on the button below. And we thank you guys so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance. Bye for now.